My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 35 years old. And by the time my father's face turned pale, my sister's fork had already struck a china plate hard enough to silence the conference room. 12 hours earlier at Dad's retirement dinner, she had lifted a champagne glass in front of our distributors, buyers, growers, employees, and half of Napa Valley and announced that I was worthless. She said she was the new CEO of the family winery I had spent 10 years turning into a $50 million brand. Then Dad stood beside her, placed one hand on her shoulder, and nodded. He did not look confused. He did not look pressured. He looked relieved, as if removing me were the last task on his retirement checklist. I congratulated them, left his unopened gift beside his plate, and walked out without raising my voice. The next morning, they arrived at the winery expecting my passwords, my resignation, and probably an apology for leaving early. Instead, a lawyer was waiting beside a stack of contracts. He opened the first folder and said, "Mr. Morgan, your daughter owns the federal trademark, every distributor agreement, and every national retail program tied to Solara Ridge. Your company owns the land, the production permit, and the estate fruit. In the marketplace, you only own the grapes." That was when Dad's face lost its color. That was when my sister dropped her fork. And that was when they discovered the detail they had ignored for 3 years, the one signature that turned their public victory into a deadline they could not outrun. Before I tell you what Dad said and what happened after I walked out, tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you're watching from. I want to see how far a story about family power and one forgotten signature can travel. 10 years earlier, Rivera Family Vineyards was 28 acres of aging vines, a cramped tasting room, a bottling line that jammed, and a loan payment my father pretended not to fear. At 26, I had an agricultural business degree, $63,000 in student debt, and no impressive title. I came home because our tasting room manager quit before harvest, and Dad needed temporary help. Temporary became 14-hour days. I tracked inventory before sunrise, drove samples to restaurants after lunch, answered customers at midnight, and learned which tank valve stuck when the temperature dropped. I did not inherit an empire. I inherited problems nobody had written down. My sister Natalie was in New York with an MBA, a luxury brand job, and a talent for making a room believe she had already become whatever she planned to be next. One September afternoon, a heat spike pushed our Cabernet toward dangerous sugar levels. I organized a night harvest, renegotiated our crush schedule, and sold the excess fruit before it spoiled. I entered the kitchen the next morning with mud at my knees and purple nails. Dad was telling a neighbor that Natalie had presented to a famous champagne house. He glanced at me and said, "Good. You handled the grapes." Then he asked about lunch for the crew. That sentence taught me the exact size of my work in his mind. The winery's old label carried our surname in gold script, but tourists forgot it before they reached the highway. I proposed a new premium brand built around the volcanic ridge above our property, Solara Ridge. Dad refused to borrow another dollar for a marketing experiment. So, I used my savings, opened a small company called Solara Beverage Holdings, and paid for the trademark search, label design, photography, compliance work, and first sales trip myself. Rivera Family Vineyards would grow and produce the wine. My company would own and develop the consumer brand, market it, and sell it through licensed channels. At first, the distinction seemed almost silly. We shared a mailbox, a family, and one exhausted daughter. But the distinction was written into every document. I poured our first Cabernet for restaurant buyers at folding tables and learned depletion reports, allocations, margins, and vintages. I drove across Texas with 12 sample cases and returned with a distributor willing to test 2 cities. I replaced handwritten club cards with an online platform, grew 800 customer names to more than 30,000, and placed us on 40 steakhouse wine lists. Through smoke scares and packaging failures, I kept releases moving. Then I hired people better than I was at winemaking, logistics, finance, and sales. By year 5, Solara Ridge was profitable. By year 7, we were in 31 states. By year 9, an outside valuation put the brand above $50 million. Our estate fruit represented less than 12% of production. Long-term grower contracts supplied the rest. The public saw one family winery. Legally, a production company and a brand company worked under a documented license. That structure became permanent 3 years before Dad retired. Our lead distributor wanted one stable entity for multi-state agreements. While the bank wanted expansion guarantees, Dad refused to pledge more land and said the risk should sit on my side. His own lawyer reviewed the deal. Dad signed a license confirming that Solara Beverage Holdings owned the trademark, designs, data, distribution relationships, and commercial programs. Rivera retained its land, wine grower license, equipment, and production revenue. The license could end if I was removed from brand leadership or the vineyard claimed ownership it lacked. I explained the clause twice. His lawyer explained it again. Dad initialed it and left early for Natalie's awards dinner. Natalie returned 6 months later as the trade press called Solara Ridge the family label to watch. Dad made her president of Rivera Family Vineyards. Although she had never sold a case or managed a harvest, I told myself her contacts could help. I shared forecasts, explained the grower contracts, and let her lead a Los Angeles launch. The resulting profile called her the visionary daughter reinventing the Rivera legacy. My name appeared once as operations support. Then, Natalie printed a glossy reserve label with her signature before trademark review, wasting $42,000. She excluded me from our largest distributor meeting by saying I was more comfortable in the cellar, then accepted a founder's award using my contracts. Each time, Dad urged me to preserve the family. I repaired the damage because I was trying to save both the business and the hope that he might finally see who built it. Natalie used that hope as operating capital. Dad's retirement dinner was a coronation. Natalie rented a Napa resort hall, placed a 10-foot Solara Ridge logo behind the podium, and invited the distributors, buyers, lenders, growers, writers, and employees who could shape our next year. The program omitted my speech and changed my title from founder and managing director to director of production coordination. Natalie called it a formatting error and walked away. I spent the first hour quietly fixing a warm reserve Cabernet, an allergy mistake, and a disastrous seeding pair, while Natalie accepted congratulations for a transition no one had explained. Dad watched her with the expression, I had spent half my life trying to earn. When I approached, he squeezed my arm and said, Please don't make tonight complicated. It was his first honest warning. After dessert, Natalie tapped her glass. The room settled. She began with a polished tribute to Dad's courage, his land, and the Rivera instinct for leadership. Then the screen behind her changed to a slide that read, Solara Ridge, the Natalie Morgan era. My distributor's head turned toward me. I kept my hands flat on the table. For 10 years, Natalie said, this family allowed loyalty to substitute for performance. That may be charming when a company is small, but a $50 million brand cannot be managed like a farm stand. A few guests shifted in their chairs. She smiled at them as if discomfort were proof of her bravery. Claire worked hard in the beginning. No one denies that. But hard work is not the same as leadership. She resists scale. undermines modern strategy, and confuses personal attachment with professional value. Then she looked directly at me. So, I'll say clearly what our family has avoided saying. Claire, you are worthless at the level this company has reached. Effective tonight, I am CEO. Your employment with the winery is terminated. The silence lasted long enough for the ice in someone's glass to crack. A fork hit a plate near the lender's table. One employee covered her mouth. Another stared at his lap. The trade reporter stopped typing, then slowly began again. Natalie had not merely fired me. She had chosen witnesses whose future decisions could magnify the humiliation. The reactions moved around me in small betrayals. Our head winemaker stared at Natalie as if she had spoken in another language. The distributor executive who had signed our first multi-state agreement lowered his glass and quietly asked his counsel for the brand ownership file. My mother pressed both hands around her water glass but did not look up. A buyer who once told me Solara survived because I answered calls at 2 a.m. now studied the tablecloth. Not one person defended me aloud. Their restraint was its own kind of verdict. They knew the speech was cruel, but no one wanted to risk standing between Natalie and the power they assumed she now possessed. That hurt more than whispers. I looked at Dad. He rose, buttoned his jacket, and moved beside her. For 1 second, I still expected him to soften it, correct it, or admit he had not approved the language. Instead, he placed his hand on Natalie's shoulder and said, "This is what the winery needs. Natalie has vision. Claire has always been better behind the scenes." Then he nodded once, slowly for the whole room. Something inside me went quiet. Not numb, quiet. There is a difference. Numbness cannot think. Quiet can hear every word, record every face, and decide which door will never open again. I lifted my napkin from my lap, folded it once, and stood. Natalie's chin rose, ready for tears or a scene. I gave her neither. I carried Dad's gift to his table and placed it beside his untouched coffee. Inside was the original Solara Ridge business plan, restored and bound in leather with the first bottle label tucked into the cover. "Congratulations," I said. "I hope you understand exactly what you have accepted." Natalie laughed. Dad did not. He recognized the moment my voice stopped asking permission. I held his gaze until he looked away, then walked past buyers, avoiding my eyes, and employees who wanted to follow but did not yet know whether they could. I left them under a logo they had never learned who owned. If the people who profited from my silence decided that silence meant weakness, did I owe them one final warning? I drove home without music. In my office, I saw a photograph from our first $1 million year. Dad between us, Natalie holding the plaque I had earned. I had treated it as evidence we were still a family. That night, I saw how carefully I had edited reality. I placed it face first in a drawer and opened the fireproof cabinet. The folders inside did not contain a revenge plan. They contained the boundaries I had created because Dad refused risk, because distributors required clarity, and because our attorney had insisted that affection was not corporate governance. I read the operating agreement, the trademark registration, the brand license, the production agreement, the grower contracts, and the key person provisions. Every page carried the same fact in different language. Solara Ridge remained with my company. Rivera Family Vineyards had permission to produce it only while honoring that structure. Natalie could fire me from the vineyard. She could not appoint herself to my company. For months, I had sensed her direction. After she delayed production approvals, I reserved capacity at a licensed custom crush facility in St. Helena and moved digital credentials to a neutral administrator. I had also scheduled a quarterly compliance review for 9 the morning after Dad's party. It was already on his calendar. Our attorney, Elizabeth Carter, was not appearing by magic. Natalie simply ignored invitations that did not place her name first. At 11:47 p.m., I sent Elizabeth a 6-word message. Activate the change of control review tomorrow. Then I wrote 3 notices. The first resigned my position with Rivera Family Vineyards. The second terminated its brand license under the clause Dad had signed. The third informed our distributors that the producer relationship had changed and that Solara Beverage Holdings would continue honoring authorized orders through a replacement licensed facility. I accused no one of theft. I repeated no family insult. I attached executed documents and asked that pending purchase orders be held for compliance confirmation. I did not email the entire staff. Public humiliation had been Natalie's method, not mine. I called our head of sales and our compliance director because they were employees of Solara, not the vineyard, and told them they would be paid whether shipments paused for 2 days or 2 weeks. I gave the St. Helena facility permission to activate the capacity reservation. I asked an independent appraiser to value the finished wine already in Rivera's cellar so I could buy it without cheating my father or subsidizing him. At 2:18 a.m., I reached the signature page Dad had initialed 3 years earlier. Beside the termination clause, his handwriting slanted across the margin. Claire assumes brand risk. Rivera land protected. I remembered how relieved he had been to place the risk on me. Now the same boundary protected the reward. I closed the file and let myself feel the grief I had postponed all evening. I cried for 7 minutes. Not because I doubted the decision, but because I no longer did. Then I washed my face, put on a navy suit, and arrived at the winery before sunrise. There are nights when a person changes her mind. That night, I changed who was allowed to change it for me. Elizabeth was in the conference room when Dad and Natalie arrived at 9:06. Breakfast was waiting. Natalie entered wearing the same gold watch she had flashed under the ballroom lights, glanced at us, and smiled as though we were there to process her victory. "Good," she said. "We can make Claire's exit official." Elizabeth introduced herself for the record, placed a small recorder in the center of the table with everyone's consent, and handed Dad the termination notice. He read the first paragraph twice. Natalie did not read it at all. She pushed it back and said that as CEO, she rejected any interruption to company business. Elizabeth opened the first binder. "You are president of Rivera Family Vineyards," she said. "You have no role or authority in Solara Beverage Holdings. They are separate companies." Natalie looked at Dad as if he could erase that sentence. Elizabeth laid out the federal trademark registration, the brand license giving Rivera limited permission to bottle under it, and distribution agreements naming Solara as supplier or authorized brand entity. Our customer data, creative assets, outside grower contracts, and national retail programs also belong to Solara. Several agreements required review if I left because I had negotiated them and guaranteed continuity. Dad's mouth opened, but no sound came. Elizabeth turned to the final page. Rivera owns the land, cellar, wine grower license, equipment, estate grapes, and its finished inventory until purchased. It does not own Solara Ridge or its rights to market. Your daughter owns the trademark distributor relationships and every national retail contract tied to it. Commercially speaking, you only own the grapes. Dad's face turned pale. Natalie's plastic fork slipped from her hand and struck the plate. The sound was smaller than the one at dinner, but this time nobody pretended not to hear it. Natalie recovered first. She called the structure fraudulent, accused me of hiding assets, and demanded that Dad fire Elizabeth. Elizabeth slid forward a letter from the independent lawyer who had represented Rivera Family Vineyards 3 years earlier. It confirmed that Dad had received separate advice, understood the division, and chose it to shield the land from expansion risk. Attached was an email Dad had sent me the same day. If Solara fails, that loss belongs to your company. The vineyard will not carry your gamble. You wanted the downside separated, I said. You signed it 3 times. You do not get to merge the companies now because the upside became valuable. Dad rubbed his face and said he thought the documents were tax planning. Elizabeth reminded him that he had also signed the bold, plain language summary. Natalie stood and paced behind her chair. She said she would rename the wine by lunch, print a new label, and call every buyer herself. Elizabeth explained that a new brand would require clearance, packaging, and applicable label approvals. While distributors and retailers remained free to reject an unproven replacement, the existing Solara labels could not simply be altered and shipped under her authority. More importantly, Natalie had announced herself as CEO of an entity she did not control in front of its commercial partners. 3 of those partners had already requested written confirmation. My phone vibrated. The largest distributor in our network was calling. I placed it face down. Dad finally spoke to me directly. Claire, stop this. We can fix what happened last night. You had a microphone and 47 witnesses. I said you told them exactly what you believed. He insisted he had only wanted a clean transition. I reminded him that he could have offered Natalie leadership of the vineyard without stealing leadership of my company. He had allowed her to use my brand as a throne because he assumed the person sitting behind the scenes had no power. Natalie leaned across the table. The Polish was gone from her voice. You planned this. You let me make that announcement so you could humiliate me today. I asked for the speaker list twice. You hid it. I asked about my title on the program. You called it a typo. I asked Dad whether there was a transition plan. He told me not to make the night complicated. You did not fall into my trap, Natalie. You reached the end of your own plan. Elizabeth then presented the immediate terms. Rivera had to stop representing itself as owner of Solara Ridge, preserve all branded inventory, and allow an independent count. My company would purchase conforming finished wine at appraised value and would offer a 1-year harvest contract for estate grapes at the prevailing premium rate. I was not taking the land, the equipment, or 1 bottle without payment. Solara's sales, marketing, and compliance employees would remain with my company. Rivera's cellar crew would remain with the vineyard unless they chose to apply elsewhere after their obligations ended. Dad stared at the table. The offer protected his harvest and prevented an immediate cash crisis, but it stripped away the illusion that he could give Natalie my company as a retirement gift. Natalie urged him to reject it. She claimed buyers loved the Rivera story and would follow them to any new label. Dad looked through the glass wall toward pallets of wine waiting for Solara labels. He finally understood that glass barrels and grapes do not create demand by themselves. Someone has to build the promise buyers believe is inside the bottle. He whispered my childhood nickname. I asked him not to use it in a legal meeting. That hurt him. I saw it. Part of me wanted to soften because daughters are trained to rescue fathers from pain. Even when those fathers delivered the wound, I did not. Elizabeth gave them until 4 o'clock to sign the inventory protocol. If they refused, she would seek an injunction to protect the mark and notify every relevant partner that Rivera had no authority to sell branded wine. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and picked up only the folder that belonged to me. Natalie had expected security to escort me out. Instead, The compliance director opened the door and followed me to my office so we could begin the transfer. Behind us, Dad said my name once. I kept walking. Was I destroying the family business, or was I finally refusing to donate my work to the people who had fired me from it? They signed the inventory protocol at 3:52 that afternoon. It was the last practical decision Dad made before denial took over. Natalie spent the next week trying to reverse reality through confidence. She called distributors and introduced herself as the rightful successor. 2 ended the call after asking for proof of authority. A third forwarded her message to Elizabeth. 3 national retail groups suspended their fall Solara features until my company confirmed supply. When I confirmed that Solara would continue through the St. Helena facility, all 3 reinstated the programs under my signature. They did not choose the family name. They chose the entity that could legally deliver the product they had ordered. The first consequence arrived in public. A trade publication replaced Natalie's planned profile, the woman taking Solara Ridge National, with a correction stating that she had no ownership or executive role in the brand. A guest's recording of her speech passed through buyer groups, where the gap between her claim and the documents became impossible to explain away. She then announced a new label called Solara Estate. Elizabeth objected because it was confusingly close to our mark. Natalie fought until Rivera's former counsel produced his notes, drafts, Dad's signed summary, and his instruction that my company bear expansion risk. Facing an injunction and rising fees, she accepted a court-enforceable order barring similar branding. It became searchable to future employers. The second consequence was financial. Natalie had projected 40% growth and committed Rivera to custom bottles, 400 French oak barrels, a renovation, and a celebrity chef launch. My company had refused those expenses, so she signed through the vineyard and personally guaranteed part of the event contract. Unused packaging, cancellation fees, deposits, and legal bills approached $900,000. A line secured against the guest cottage came due as the bank cut its forecast for a producer without a national brand. I did not celebrate that loss. I also did not absorb it. I purchased 18,400 cases of conforming finished wine at the price set by the independent appraiser. That payment covered payroll, taxes, and part of the line, but not Natalie's expansion spree. Dad sold the guest cottage and 6 acres at the southern edge of the property to satisfy the remaining debt. For 30 years, he had described the vineyard as land he would pass intact to his daughters. He lost part of it not because I took it, but because he approved obligations against sales his company did not control. The third consequence was professional. Natalie's former firm declined to rehire her after reviewing the order. A beverage group withdrew a vice president offer, and 2 winery boards removed her. The organization that had honored her requested evidence for a case study built from my team's strategy, growth, and distribution map. When she could not prove authorship, it rescinded the award. Her identity collapsed because someone finally asked her to document it. Natalie blamed me in every room that would still admit her. She told relatives I had stolen Dad's retirement. She told old classmates I had exploited a paperwork trick. She told employees I planned to sell the brand to a conglomerate and abandoned Napa. I answered once through a factual statement approved by counsel. Solara Beverage Holdings had always owned the brand and would continue operating independently. I attached no family messages. I released no recording from the dinner. Revenge would have meant maximizing her pain. Accountability meant refusing to minimize the truth. By the end of the second month, Dad removed Natalie as president of Rivera Family Vineyards. The decision came too late to save his retirement plan and too late to repair us. She had paid herself a relocation advance under an employment agreement that became untenable once the vineyard lost the brand revenue. To avoid a separate claim, she returned the unused portion and sold her new car. The personal guarantee on the cancelled launch contract consumed much of her savings. She moved out of her Napa rental and, after months of rejected senior-level applications, accepted a position in Arizona as an assistant account coordinator for a regional hospitality supplier. Her salary was less than a third of what she had expected to earn as Solara's CEO. She reported to a manager younger than she was, held no budget authority, and could not present herself to alcohol industry clients without disclosing the order if asked about the case. The private cost was heavier. The people drawn to Natalie's apparent power stopped returning calls. She and Dad blamed each other for ignoring documents both had received. He said she pushed too hard. She reminded him that he had stood beside her and nodded. Both were right. Dad's consequence was not simply money. Rivera Family Vineyard survived, but it returned to what it had been before. Solara, a respected small producer and contract grower with land skill and no national consumer engine. The large ridge sign came down from the entrance because the license had ended. Dad watched workers unbolt it from the stone wall where he had posed for retirement photographs. He kept the metal letters in a storage shed, although they no longer belonged on his gate. In the first year of retirement, he attended no trade dinners. Some former friends were polite. Others avoided him because they had watched him publicly dismiss the person whose contracts made his status possible. He called me 11 times in the first month. The early messages asked me to reconsider. The next one said, Natalie had misled him. I answered only after his 9th message when he finally said, I chose not to know, because her version made me feel important. That was the first apology that contained responsibility. I met him with Elizabeth present and offered a 3-year agreement to buy a limited amount of estate fruit at market price, subject to quality. It gave the vineyard stability without giving Dad control, a board seat, brand credit, or the right to call Solara a Rivera family asset. He signed without leaving early. My team moved quickly because the contingency plan was built for disruption, not revenge. The St. Helena facility and our bottler handled production and label compliance, with every change reviewed before shipping. Deliveries resumed after a short hold. I promoted our compliance director, paid retention bonuses, and created a board with 2 independent members. 6 months after the dinner, Solara Ridge posted its strongest direct-to-consumer quarter. I did not triple the valuation overnight, and I did not become a celebrity. Real businesses recover through less glamorous victories. Orders shipped correctly. Growers were paid on time. Employees were protected from chaos. Buyers told the truth before rumors told it for them. The satisfaction I felt did not come from Natalie's smaller apartment or Dad's empty gate. It came from walking into a Monday meeting and realizing nobody in the room expected me to apologize for knowing what I was doing. 1 year later, I watched our anniversary Cabernet move down the line. The front still said, Solara Ridge. The back added one line, founded and led by Claire Morgan. I had feared visible credit looked selfish. Natalie taught me that when you erase yourself to keep peace, someone else may use the blank space to rewrite history. The company was stronger because we diversified production, formalized succession, created profit sharing, and separated family access from authority. Our valuation rose modestly, debt fell, and retailer trust deepened. I bought Dad's grapes when they met our standards using the same formula offered to other growers. No favors, no punishment. Dad and I now speak once or twice a month. We discuss weather, crop yields, and his blood pressure. He has apologized without blaming Natalie, although he still reaches for explanations when silence becomes uncomfortable. I have forgiven him enough to stop carrying the argument into every room. I have not restored his authority, access, or the version of our relationship that depended on my obedience. Forgiveness can release the past without rehiring it. Natalie remains in Arizona as an account coordinator, still paying the canceled launch settlement while senior wine companies pass on her applications. The industry has not banned her. It has remembered. Last winter, she emailed that she finally understood why I kept copies of everything. I did not answer. Understanding a consequence is not understanding the person you harmed. The leather-bound business plan I left at Dad's dinner stayed unopened for 7 months. He eventually returned it by courier with a note tucked inside. He wrote that he had spent his life believing the land was the legacy. He now understood that land could grow fruit, but trust, judgment, and work created value. He said he was sorry he had praised the daughter who performed leadership while treating the daughter who practiced it as hired help. I keep that note in the fireproof cabinet beside our operating agreement. Not as proof that everything healed, but as proof that the truth finally reached him when praise no longer protected him from it. People sometimes call what I did revenge. I understand why. My sister fired me in public, and by the next morning she learned that the throne she claimed belonged to a company she did not own. She lost the title, the industry standing, the money, and the audience that had made her feel powerful. Dad lost part of his land, his public legacy, and the easy loyalty of the daughter who had spent 10 years trying to earn one sincere nod. Those consequences were severe, but I did not manufacture them. I stopped standing between them and the weight of their own decisions. What I gained was less dramatic and more valuable. I no longer confuse being needed with being respected. I no longer accept private dependence as compensation for public erasure. I know that contracts cannot make a family love you, but they can stop that family from converting your love into an asset they believe they own. And I know that quiet is powerful only when it contains a boundary. If your family asked you to surrender the thing you built in exchange for finally belonging, which loss could you live with? The business or the illusion that their approval was ever yours to earn? Tell me where you would draw the line in the comments. Thank you for watching and supporting our channel. This fictional video was made only for entertainment, education, and reflection. We hope it reminds you that the end of a toxic cycle may feel painful because it is unfamiliar, not because it's wrong. Give yourself time to adjust to a life that no longer requires constant emotional defense.